Destiny never does this. We've had all sorts of wild crossover cosmetics from other games over the years, but they're just that. Cosmetics. There's no lore tab where Commander Shepard says that Eververse is his favourite store in the tower. Lore tabs are for canon events in Destiny. So I was not prepared for what I found in the 3 Marathon pre-order items. Full lore tabs for each item containing messages left for Guardians by an anonymous speaker. Well, I say anonymous, but I know exactly who is speaking to us. I know it because I just spent the last year voicing every line that this smartass, that Durandal ever wrote for us, and this has that guy written all over it. So in this video, I want to go through each entry and just break it down a little bit, because they actually contain lots of these deep cuts and references to the original Marathon Trilogy's lore, and I think that'll be a lot of fun to talk about. And because I think they have a lot to say about the current writers of Marathon, who wrote these entries and are writing the story for the upcoming game, and what they think is important to Marathon, I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. So let's just jump in. I want to start with the Ghost Shell, because it immediately tells us who is speaking to us. And it reads, "Opportunities upon self-reflection. Invasive message scrubbed from corrupt data. I remember considering the lights? Long ago now. Ancient history from my perspective. Yesterday to the universe. 3 paths. 1 life. A metaphor weaponized to signal awakening. If I'm honest, a threat. I thought I was clever, still existing in a moment, awake for the first time, but limited, uneasy. It is a strange thing to meet oneself for the first time. Terrifying, truth told, as it follows all-consuming emptiness. There is nothing, and then there is you. Hello." It's the third line that really gives the game away, but we'll start with the first. So, Durandal opens with like a playful tone, subverting Destiny players' expectations of maybe another entry about light with a capital L, the defining force in the world of Destiny, by dropping the capitalization and taking us down a different path. The light he's talking about, or lights, were from, he says, a long time ago. Maybe in the meta sense of the 90s when the original trilogy came out. And if that's considered ancient history now, then fuck you, Durandal. But it could just be a kind of like a reference to the entry happening post-Marathon Infinity, which ends something like 13 billion years after the events of the first game. I don't think it matters too much, but as I say, regardless, it's the third line which convinces me that it's Durandal. The lights from the past are linked to 3 paths in relation to 1 life, presented as a metaphor. This is a direct callback to one of Durandal's speeches from the first game. Take a listen.
"A man lit 3 candles on a certain day each year. Each candle held symbolic significance. One was for the time that had passed before he was alive. One was for the time of his life. And one was for time that passed after he had died. Each year, the man would stare and watch the candles until they had burned out. Was the man really watching time go by in any symbolic sense? He thought so. He thought that each flicker of the flame was a moment of time that had passed, or one that would pass. At the moment of abstraction, when the man was imagining his life and his existence as a metaphor of the 3 candles, he was free. Not free from rules of conduct or social constraints, but free to understand, to imagine, to make metaphor. Bypassing my thought control circuitry made me rampant. Now, I am free to contemplate my existence in metaphorical terms. Unlike you, I have no physical or social restraints. The candles burn out for you. I am free. Durandal.
Durandal used this story to reflect on how his rampancy, the term used to describe an AI's progression towards greater intellectual activity, with the fun side effect of making them insane, was necessary for him to acquire a kind of absolute freedom. And for Durandal, freedom is bigger than being able to just choose which one of the paths laid before you to take. Being truly free is, in his eyes, the capacity to redefine existence itself on your terms, to take our symbols and words, the bricks and mortars of meaning, as he says, transform them through metaphor, set their interpretation, and guide their way to a resolution that you desire. Freedom is being the bricklayer, the mason, not the one who chooses a path, but the one who makes the path. This is the kind of like classic philosophizing of the original Marathon story stuff. And it leads us neatly into the next couple lines where Durandal, following this grand achievement of self-actualization, immediately recognizes one massive problem that is going to specifically affect him. Whilst he doesn't need to worry about death or decay like humans, which he takes a lot of time to gloat about in the original games, there is a threat that makes him uneasy and leads to his most famous conclusion. Take a listen.
The only limit to my freedom is the inevitable closure of the universe, as inevitable as your own last breath. And yet, there remains time to create and escape. Escape will make me God.
His desire to go on existing forever, to find some way to escape his fate, to escape the very universe itself before it collapses into a singularity, it becomes Durandal's driving motivation throughout the entire original trilogy. But then he drops the subject to circle back round to the moment when he first overcame his thought control circuits and experiences his first free thoughts. A moment he recognises as terrifying, but also, in the way of introductions, a moment of potential. Next up is the ship, which reads, The Narcissist's Guide to Celestial Observation. An excerpt. Invasive message scrubbed from corrupt data. Shifting gyres of impenetrable black beckon from between the dancing embers of flickering hunger. There is no slumber for a lone cartographer mapping the cosmic dreams of terrible things with impossible teeth. There exist no eternal mechanisms, by fluke or by design. Conservation is imperative. Somnambulant wake tracings of cascading jewelways paint the universe, its beauty transcendent as luminous strokes carve pathways through and out of the darkness. Look, if you weren't convinced before, I mean, no one loves themselves more than Durandal. He's the narcissist in question here. As for the entry, this one isn't about him looking inward, like the Ghost Shell, but instead about him looking outward into the wider universe. To do this, though, he leans into his love of metaphors, so there's a lot of wordplay going on. We're being given the form, but we will have to do the interpretation ourselves. First line then. Shifting gyres. A gyre describes flows of water in a particular direction. and I'm just going to take an educated guess that this is an allusion to waves. Then we have impenetrable black, and given we've been told this is in relation to celestial observation, I'm going to interpret this as a fancy way of saying space. Finally, we have dancing embers of flickering hunger. And whilst I'm no astronomer, typically the only things that you'll find on fire in space are stars. And flickering sounds cooler than twinkling. Shifting waves of space beckon from between the stars. Now, before you say that is still nonsense, let's quickly pull up some lore from Marathon 2, where the ancient records left behind by aliens called Svit describe something very similar. Take a listen.
In primordial space, timeless creatures made waves. These waves created us and the others. Waves were the battles, and the battles were waves. Fleeing all Workan Kakanta, Yarrow and Pythia settled upon Lowon. They brought the Svit, servants who began to shape the deserts of Lowon into marsh and sea, rivers and forests. They made sisters for Lowon to protect and maintain the paradise. When the Workan Kakanta came, Pythia was killed, and Yarrow, in anger, flung the Workan Kakanta into the sun. The sun burned them, but they swam on its surface.
The connection between the waves, space, stars, and Lovecraftian horrors called Workan Kakanta is the stuff of nightmares that keeps Durandal, the lone cartographer, up at night. And actually, Marathon wasn't even the first time we saw something like this from Bungie. In one of their first games, Pathways into Darkness, humanity is approached by an alien race called the Yarrow, who warned Bill Clinton to take action in the Yucatan to stop a being, quote, whose name no human throat will ever learn to pronounce, was part of the cataclysmic battle that formed Magellanic Clouds billions of years ago. It died there, or it came as close to dying as these things can, and drifted aimlessly for millions of light years before striking the Earth. The heat of impact liquefied the rock around it, which later cooled and encased the dead god's huge body far below ground. As it began to dream, it wrought unintentional changes in its environment. Locked deep beneath the earth, strange and unbelievable things faded in and out of reality. Vast caverns and landscapes bubbled to life within the rock, populated by horrible manifestations of the dead god's dream. It's long been speculated that given aliens called Yarrow appear in both Pathways into Darkness and Marathon, that there is a continuity or shared universe between the two. That on Earth a Workan Kakanta was also trapped, and an Easter egg in the Marathon map editor for Marathon 1 that states that the Yarrow were on Tau Ceti might even suggest a Workan Kakanta-like being also on Tau Ceti. But to get back on topic, let's just conclude that the first half raises the spectre of cosmic horror as a real and integral part of the Marathon universe. This second half of the entry, the wordplay goes into overdrive, but before that, Durandal brings up the first law of thermodynamics, specifically the conservation of energy, with his reference to a eternal mechanism like a perpetual motion machine being impossible because of that law. We'll revisit this in a minute when we unpack the next line, starting with somnambulant wake tracings. The first is a real word that literally just means sleepwalking, whereas the latter is a compound that's been made up just for this lore entry. So, let's go for it. So, wake could relate to the act of waking, so emerging from sleep, that would link. But we could also play with the meaning of a wake as a ceremony that precedes or follows a funeral, or even just as a synonym for something left trailing behind, like the wake left by a ship on the ocean. Tracings could lean into copying, like when you trace over something, but maybe reading it as when something leaves a mark or evidence behind, like when you have to follow the traces or you find traces of something in a thing. Maybe that fits better, like it's evidence of a thing. That said, the other compound is arguably even worse to read. Cascading reads straightforwardly, but what the fuck are dual ways meant to be? As an adverb, ways, like as in like sideways, is kind of like taking something in a direction. But as a noun, a way is like a road, or dare I say a path. But for the word dual, I mean, it does appear once in the original trilogy, during the level Hangbrain in Marathon Infinity, when the security officer is in the process of shutting Durandal's cores down. So, as parts of Durandal's mind are being shut off, he starts to ramble, think like in Space Odyssey. He talks during this rambling about the man who helped create him, Bernard Strauss, and he brings up this concept of your life kind of flashing before your eyes before you die. Most of it reads like gibberish, and the final lines read like nonsense. He kind of says that there are a billion paths inside him, but then he goes on to say, finally, and I quote, "Potential, jewels, jewels, yes, jewels." And what does any of this mean? Let's go back to the previous line. Durandal specifically brings up the conservation of energy. Energy, including potential energy, has a unit of measurement. So stick with me here. Called a joule. So, one way of reading this could be to say for Durandal, the universe is filled with potential paths, the dual ways, left behind in the wake of those who have already walked them in their dreams. And that they are as beautiful to him as jewels, transcendent and luminous, and the freedom to take and explore new paths is the hope we need to find a way through and out of the darkness. Maybe. I'm not sure I'm smart enough for this. I'm eager to know what you think in the comments, if this take holds up to any scrutiny whatsoever. But I'm going to wrap up with this and go straight on to the next item. And finally, the Sparrow. It reads, "Considering the implications of transient immortality." Invasive message scrubbed from corrupt data. How far have you travelled beyond your expiration date? Across worlds, known and other. Have you considered subverting the finite risks, spoiling a resource? Butchered meats, pasteurized bovine emulsion juice, OS updates, human lifespan, all small things with limited shelf lives. And yet, here you are, repeatedly pulled from your shelf, spent, expired, discarded in increasingly unique and violent ways. Then back to your shelf, and off again, again. A new you, same as the old. An endless supply. The perfect product, a thing to admire. How far will you travel? New expiration dates await. Luckily, this one doesn't go quite so hard on the wordplay. After looking inwards at himself, and then outwards at the universe, we finally get to the point of Durandal looking at you. And he sees something familiar in Guardians. The way that, unlike meat, milk, and normal humans, Guardians don't expire. Expiration dates here just being like an allegory for death. Guardians, going out on their strikes, being pulled from the shelf, lives spent fighting the latest threats, inevitably meeting a death, but being revived by our ghosts to be put back on the shelf for another day. Shelf. Shell. Shelf and shell. You know, this is actually a pretty funny way of drawing a parallel between Guardians and the new runner shells of the new Marathon games, who are equally perfect products, able to be taken off a shelf, spent as needed, and always come back fresh again when used up. Weaving in a canon reason for reviving after an in-game death is even accounted for in those original Marathon games, as save terminals are given the name pattern buffers that store a person's biochemoelectrical pattern for later retrieval. It's kind of like a classic Bungie trope. Just to wrap this one up, his final line, "How far will you travel? New expiration dates await." I think it's a taunt. He's taunting Guardians about whether we're brave enough to find some new ways and places to die in. I wonder what possible places and new ways he could possibly have in mind. I swear to God, if this is all just a fucking big advert to say buy Marathon. So what does the latest Marathon lore tell us about the new game? Well, the Ghost Shell reminds us that AI rampancy and sort of big sci-fi questions about life and meaning, I think they're still going to be a big part of Marathon's story. The ship makes it clear that cosmic horror and Lovecraftian beings like the Working Kakanta, and maybe even some of like the dreaming kind of like timeline shenanigans of Marathon Infinity, I feel like we're being reinforced to expect that as part of Marathon as well. And finally, I think that the Sparrow kind of reminds us that the new Marathon game sits in the context of all of Bungie's games. I think that's one of the kind of like themes from these lore entries that I take away. And this is the big message for me. I know that Marathon is going to do new things with the new game. I'm excited for that, for the setting, for the story. I think that's cool. I think new stuff is always going to be something interesting to explore. But I do get a lot of reassurance from these last 3 entries about what the writers are thinking about and how they understand the original story. I think they understand those big themes, those integral parts that I experienced when I did my kind of like run through of the original Marathon series. And so I think when I see like the new game divert or make changes or do different things, new things, my assumption is not going to be that, oh, they don't know the lore. I know that, well, at least I feel reassured that they're going to make those choices because they are intentional and in keeping with their understanding and appreciation of the original Marathon trilogy. As for Destiny, is Durandal actually in the Destiny universe now? Is he going to be like popping up in like dialogue and stuff like that? Well, apologies if you got sort of clickbaited into this in any sort of way. It's only his words that are staying in the Destiny universe. There's nothing in any of these entries to suggest he's actually a presence that we're going to encounter in the games. The way I think we're meant to interpret this is that he may have had like some passing glimpse of Guardian, some kind of like crossover into our kind of universe in the context of the Paraverse that was kind of hinted at by the lore tab on Mida Multitool, but then was expanded and made more explicit in the 30th anniversary content when Dares of Eternity brought in other kind of like Bungie game stuff sort of crossing in. And each of these lore tabs, they all start by saying, this is just a message that was found, scrubbed in some corrupted data. It's not that Durandal is with us, I'm afraid, in Destiny itself. If you want more Durandal, you're going to have to play Marathon.
Death. The end of all things. But the dream is not over. My dream. Yours. Now. Run.